While some wrestlers become legends and icons, others let their pride and ego ruin their entire career. From getting arrested to being blacklisted by every major wrestling promotion, these are the most satisfying downfalls in WWE history, starting with none other than Alberto Del Rio. When WWE brought Del Rio in from Mexico in 2010, Vince saw him as the next Eddie Guerrero, and for a while, things looked promising. Del Rio won Royal Rumble and Money in the Bank in the same year. He became WWE Champion and World Heavyweight Champion multiple times. He feuded with John Cena, CM Punk, and Sheamus at the top of the card. On paper, his resume reads like a Hall of Famer, but the paper version of his career and the real version are two completely different stories. Despite his push at the top of the card, Del Rio never truly connected with the audience. WWE kept pushing him, kept giving him opportunities, kept believing the connection with the fans would eventually come, but it never did. His first run ended in 2014 under ugly circumstances. A social media employee allegedly made a hurtful comment toward him backstage, and Del Rio responded by physically slapping the man. The context created divided opinions at the time. Some fans sympathized, others said no matter what was said, you don't put your hands on a colleague. Then WWE brought him back in 2015, and that second chance lasted less than a year. His attitude had gotten worse. He failed a wellness test, no-showed live events, and gave every indication that he'd rather be anywhere else. He walked out of WWE again in 2016, and this time, for good. What followed was a years-long pattern of self-destruction that overshadowed anything he did in the ring. First came his messy relationship with Paige, which ended on bad terms. Then, in 2020, Del Rio was arrested in San Antonio after his ex-fiancée accused him of aggravated kidnapping and assault. The charges were eventually dropped in December 2021 after a key witness failed to appear for trial, and Del Rio maintained his innocence throughout, claiming the accusations were fabricated, but the damage to his name in the wrestling world was already done. In early 2025, Del Rio got into a physical altercation with fans at an AAA show in Tijuana and was suspended for 6 months by the Tijuana Wrestling Commission. That same year, WWE acquired AAA, and reports indicated the creative team had no interest in being associated with him. And just when you thought things couldn't get worse, in April 2026, Del Rio was reportedly arrested again for domestic violence. A 4-time world champion, reduced to a cautionary tale that no major promotion is interested in touching. That's the real Alberto Del Rio story. But while Del Rio's downfall played out over years, this next wrestler's career imploded in a matter of months thanks to his obnoxious attitude. When Enzo Amore debuted in NXT alongside the towering Big Cass, the obvious star of the team was the 7-footer standing behind him. Enzo was supposed to be the sidekick, the comic relief, the guy you tolerated because his partner was a future main eventer. But Enzo had a gift that can't be taught. The man could talk. He could grab an audience by the collar and refuse to let go. His pre-match promos became must-see. Fans memorized his catchphrases word for word. He had the rare ability to capture the crowd's attention. But backstage, the story was entirely different. Almost from the moment he arrived on the main roster in 2016, reports started surfacing about Enzo's attitude. Veterans didn't like him. Locker room complaints piled up. He was accused of being reckless in the ring, cheated on his then-partner Liv Morgan, and was generally difficult to deal with. At one point, he was famously kicked off the WWE tour bus by Roman Reigns. After splitting from Big Cass, Enzo moved to the Cruiserweight division in 2017, where he actually found some success as an obnoxious heel champion. But then, in January 2018, a woman in Phoenix, Arizona, had accused Enzo of assault stemming from an incident in October 2017. The accusation went viral during a Monday hours before Raw while Enzo was in the building for rehearsals. WWE had to rewrite significant portions of the show at 4 p.m. that afternoon. Enzo was pulled from everything, summoned to Vince McMahon's office, and suspended on the spot. The next day, he was fired, still the reigning Cruiserweight champion, forcing WWE to vacate the title entirely. The Phoenix Police Department later closed the case due to insufficient evidence. But by then, it didn't matter. The locker room had wanted him gone long before the allegations surfaced. This was just the moment the door finally swung open. What followed was a masterclass in how to destroy your own career. Just 6 months after being released, Enzo attended Survivor Series 2018 by purchasing a ticket, stood on his seat, and attempted to hijack the crowd, resulting in security removing him from the arena. He launched a rap career that went nowhere. He wrestled sporadically on the independent circuit, working shows that drew hundreds when he used to draw tens of thousands. He feuded publicly on social media, got into a physical altercation with Joey Janela at a concert, and burned every bridge possible. As of May 2026, there have been whispers about a return to WWE. But even if he returns to the company and gets back in the ring, it'll be interesting to see the dynamic between him and the guys in the locker room because the locker room voted him out long before the company did. However, while Enzo never touched the main event scene, this next wrestler was one of the biggest stars of the 90s, and his ego was equally massive. There are very few wrestlers in history who were as big as the Ultimate Warrior at his peak. When Warrior sprinted to the ring, fans lost their minds. At WrestleMania 6, Warrior defeated Hulk Hogan in the middle of the ring to win the WWE Championship. Hogan had been the unquestioned top star of wrestling for 6 straight years. Beating him clean on the biggest stage, that was WWE telling the entire world that the Ultimate Warrior was their next megastar. The future of the company stood 6 feet 2, weighed 280 pounds, and wore face paint. But what happened next is one of wrestling's most spectacular ego implosions. Warrior's rise to the top had convinced him that the rules simply didn't apply to him. He held the championship for 9 months before dropping it to Sergeant Slaughter. Then came SummerSlam 1991, where Warrior was booked in the main event in a tag team match alongside Hulk Hogan. Before the show, Warrior sent Vince McMahon a letter with a list of demands: more money, a higher cut of merchandise, a lighter schedule. And at the bottom of that letter, the part that made Vince McMahon's blood boil: a threat to no-show SummerSlam entirely if his terms weren't met. McMahon agreed to the financial demands to protect his pay-per-view, but nobody who knew Vince McMahon thought that was the end of it. The moment the show ended, Warrior was suspended indefinitely. WWE brought him back in 1992 because Hogan was leaving and they needed a top babyface, but Warrior hadn't learned a thing. His attitude backstage had deteriorated further. He no-showed live events with no explanation. He was reportedly dismissive and rude to fans and colleagues. He carried himself as though the company owed him something that could never fully be repaid. When the steroid scandal investigation swept through WWE in the early 90s and Warrior tested positive, McMahon used it as the perfect opportunity to finally let him go. There would be brief, forgettable returns during the late 90s, but his moment at the top was gone. For over 2 decades, Warrior remained estranged from WWE. The company even released a DVD in 2005 called The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, which featured his former colleagues openly tearing his legacy apart. The reconciliation finally came in 2014. Warrior agreed to be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. He gave a speech on the Raw after Mania that felt like a man finally making peace with himself and everyone he'd wronged. 3 days later, on April 8, 2014, Warrior died suddenly in Scottsdale, Arizona, at age 54 from cardiovascular disease. The tragedy of the Ultimate Warrior isn't that he failed to be the next megastar. It's that he had everything, and chose ego over legacy for 20 years before running out of time to fully enjoy the peace he'd finally found. But while Warrior tasted the bright lights of WrestleMania, this next wrestler never came close to any world title, and still had an ego the size of a wrestling arena. Before NXT reached its peak, and when Ring of Honor was making its name in hardcore wrestling circles in the mid-2000s, Low Ki was a star on the independent circuit. Stiff kicks that sounded like gunshots. Submission holds applied with serious intensity. A physicality that made every match feel uncomfortably real. He became the inaugural ROH World Champion in 2002, a 3-time IWGP Junior Heavyweight Champion in Japan, and a decorated veteran across virtually every major non-WWE promotion on the planet. And then WWE came calling. In 2010, Low Ki entered the 2nd season of NXT during the game show era. He was paired with Lay Cool, repackaged under the name Kaval, and stripped of pretty much everything that had made him special in the first place. The intensity was still there, the kicks were still there, but the identity that separated him from every other athletic undersized guy on the roster was gone. He won NXT Season 2 in August 2010, but almost immediately the downward spiral began. During a September 2010 NXT segment, Kaval went off-script during a freestyle promo and referenced TNA wrestling in a moment that prompted Vince McMahon to confront him backstage and threaten to fire him on the spot. His main roster run had produced a handful of SmackDown appearances, a challenge for the Intercontinental Championship that he didn't win, and very little else. WWE released him on December 23, 2010, less than 4 months after he'd won NXT. But instead of learning from his mistakes and cleaning up his act, Low Ki developed a bigger ego. In TNA, Low Ki's tenure ended amid reported conflicts over creative direction and attitude issues, with co-founder Jeff Jarrett once describing him as his own worst enemy. Even New Japan and Ring of Honor eventually distanced themselves. The list of promotions that have worked with Low Ki and then quietly moved on is longer than the list of championships he's won. The tragedy of Low Ki is that he's genuinely one of the most talented wrestlers of his generation. He should have been a star like his peers Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels. Instead, His ego caused his downfall. Today, he still wrestles on the independent circuit. And when he's in the ring, he can still make you remember exactly why everyone was so excited about him in the first place. But the stages keep getting smaller, and the opportunities to prove himself on the biggest platform have long since passed. However, while low-key slowly vanished into obscurity, this next wrestler had the title belt in her hands, the entire industry watching, and she still found a way to burn it all down. Technically, Tessa Blanchard was never a WWE star. She appeared in the Mae Young Classic, but nothing notable came out of it. So why is she on this list? Well, in early 2020, Tessa was on a hot streak, and with the women's division in WWE reaching a new peak with Becky Lynch at the top, there were serious talks of Tessa coming in for a feud with big-time Bex. In January 2020, Tessa defeated Sami Callihan to become the Impact World Champion. Not the Knockouts Champion, not a women's title, but the primary world championship of a well-known professional wrestling company. The moment was historically significant. Tessa was 24 years old, wrestling royalty as the daughter of Tully Blanchard, and had earned the spot through years of proving she could outwork nearly everyone on the roster. It should have been the beginning of a defining run, but what happened instead was one of the biggest self-destructions in recent memory. Allegations came out that Blanchard had spat in a fellow wrestler's face and used a racial slur during an incident in Japan in 2017. Then came the wave. Chelsea Green, Priscilla Kelly, Renee Michelle, and multiple other female wrestlers added their own accusations of bullying. The stories kept coming, from names credible enough that dismissing them all as coordinated attacks became increasingly difficult. Blanchard denied everything at the start, but denial wasn't enough to stop the tide. Reports emerged almost immediately that both WWE and AEW had no interest in signing her, with the negative publicity making her radioactive to the two biggest companies in the world. Independent promotions started pulling her from shows. The momentum that had taken years to build evaporated inside a news cycle. To make things worse, Tessa kept digging her own grave. With the pandemic shutting down the wrestling world in 2020, Blanchard was reportedly in Mexico and unreachable, all while still holding the Impact World Championship. Impact eventually stripped her of the championship and formally terminated her contract. What followed was years of near-total exile from the mainstream wrestling scene. She worked independently in Mexico, far from the spotlight she'd been standing in. Blanchard eventually returned to TNA at the end of 2024. Which was either a redemption arc beginning or a reminder of how far she'd fallen depending on your perspective. She should have been a star on the level of Becky Lynch. Instead, she became a cautionary tale about how quickly reputation can be destroyed. Austin Aries spent the better part of 15 years being one of the best wrestlers on the planet. The talent was undeniable, and so were the attitude issues. Before the WWE, he was a TNA World Champion, a multiple-time X-Division champion, and one of the most decorated performers in that company's history. By 2016, he debuted in NXT and moved to the main roster as part of the Cruiserweight division. For a guy who'd spent his career proving he deserved a seat at the big table, he finally had one, but that run evaporated faster than it came. WWE released him in July 2017, citing creative disagreements. Aries went back to Impact Wrestling and picked up where he'd left off, winning the World Championship and carrying himself like a man who had a point to prove. For a while, it looked like he might actually prove it. But then came Bound for Glory 2018. In the main event, Aries defended the Impact World Championship against Johnny Impact in a match that had blurred the lines between reality and kayfabe. Right after the match ended, Aries climbed to his feet almost immediately after being pinned, leaving the ring without selling the effects of the match. Aries has maintained since that the whole thing was planned, but whether it was a work or a genuine eruption of ego doesn't fully matter. What matters is the outcome. The rematch that was supposedly planned never happened. Aries never came back to Impact. No major company picked up the phone. He drifted to the independent circuit and hasn't returned to mainstream wrestling ever since. The thing about Austin Aries is that he was genuinely talented, but he left every room he was ever in with the lingering question of whether the drama was worth it. At some point, enough rooms decided it wasn't. But while wrestlers like Austin Aries and Low-Ki were self-made, some wrestlers fail even after having the advantage of family connections in wrestling. And if you want to find out what happened to every failed product of nepotism in WWE, check out this video next.